I think that this kind of essentialism in decoloniality theory has licensed and endorsed and made possible the resurgence that we're seeing all over the world, really, but especially on certain university campuses and especially in certain intellectual spaces of a vigilance with respect to the speaker's identity. If I disagree with you, I don't need to say why you are wrong with respect to some independent standard of evaluation. Remember, there's no such thing as universal values anyway, right? But I can help myself to this criticism of you have been brainwashed by the West. When you talk about African values, let's say, and a lot of these either proper decolonial theorists or those who have been inspired of them feel quite comfortable these days to talk about African values and Western values. There's an extraordinary threat of homogenization that's taking place there. I spoke about Paul Anton Tonji's idea of the myth of primitive unanimity, this fiction that the whole of Africa in the past shared a consensus and a common set of ideas with respect to metaphysics and politics and all the rest of it. If we believe that there are these different ethnies and these different knowledge systems, that there are African values, and that African people think like this, or there are Western values and Western people think like this, what the hell are you going to do when over and over again you keep finding people who come from these knowledge systems or these ethnies and are not thinking the way that you want them to think? They're not conforming to the kind of knowledge system that you think is proper to that location. They are troublesome because they're thinking differently, or they are challenging the status quo, or they are putting pressure on what is supposed to be the knowledge that's proper to their location. What are you going to do about these people? Are you going to say that they are abnormal? Are you going to say that they are aberrant? One way that the decolonials have tended to respond to this problem. So let's say, for example, you've got a person who's an intellectual from Africa, so he should be using African values and African epistemology in order to make his critique of the world and make his inquiries into the world. But this person is saying, look, I'm interested in this idea which comes from the West. I'm interested in a limited defense of certain modern institutions or something like this, right? Then you can help yourself to this following criticism. This guy is brainwashed. He's been brainwashed by the West. Remember, the West goes around during colonialism, according to this story, through its toxic colonial education, brainwashing or ideologically programming various indigenous peoples into thinking like them. And so what's happening here is that this person has succumbed to that brainwashing, has been unable to resist the force of this delusion. He's internalized the values of the West. He's now thinking like a Westerner. I think that this kind of essentialism in decoloniality theory has licensed and endorsed and made possible the resurgence that we're seeing all over the world, really, but especially on certain university campuses and especially in certain intellectual spaces, of a vigilance with respect to the speaker's identity. If I disagree with you, I don't need to say why you are wrong with respect to some independent standard of evaluation. Remember, there's no such thing as universal values anyway, right? But I can help myself to this criticism of you have been brainwashed by the West. You are a sellout. You are someone who has been enchanted by the West. You are doing the bidding of the West. If you think that I'm just making this up, I'm going to give you a list of actual African thinkers that I've encountered in just two of Ndlovu-Gatsheni's books, in which he's done exactly this. Before I do that, I just want to say, you find quite an imaginative language to explain this brainwashing and decoloniality. Ndlovu-Gatsheni, for example, will often use the language of seduced or bewitched. So you have been bewitched by the values of the West. You know, you're under the spell of the West, and that's why you're thinking this way. Or I've read in the writings of the scholar Toyin Falola, he speaks of being kidnapped, epistemologically kidnapped. So it's like there is some real, genuine, authentic way you're supposed to be thinking, but your mind has been kidnapped. And then also, I think this is probably one of the most amusing ones. This is coming from the Indian ethno-nationalist constitutional lawyer J. Sai Deepak, who was greatly inspired by the work of Mignolo. And he speaks of being incepted, Now, you may have watched Christopher Nolan's excellent 2010 science fiction movie, Inception. Did you see that one by any chance?
Yes,
And
I
you
did.
remember Inception, in Inception, there's this idea that you can tap into someone's mind and implant this idea in their very unconscious, in their dream life. And then in their waking life, they start going around acting out this idea, even though it's been through a process of infiltration and espionage, been planted into their very unconscious. So Sai Deepak helps himself to the idea that where I see a person who's supposed to be, I presume, using the epistemology of India, or he calls it Bharat, as a kind of time before colonization in India, the kind of value system or epistemology of that time. The person has been incepted. It's almost as though the West has implanted this toxic idea in his very unconscious, and now he's kind of a robot going around, a servile creature going around doing the bidding of the West and annihilating his own culture and himself in the process. Okay, now here's a list of people that you encounter in Ndlovu-Gatsheni who have been brainwashed. Olufemi Taiwo, who, like I said, is a remarkable critic. He actually has a new book out called Against Decolonization, a very provocative title, and I'm sure many of your readers who have an appetite for more critical works around decolonization, they would love to read it. Ndlovu-Gatsheni says that Olufemi Taiwo has been enchanted by Euro-modernity. Of Samir Amin, the great Egyptian economist and inventor of the term Eurocentrism, he says he has been interpolated by Western epistemologies. Where he disagrees with the theorist Achille Mbembe, Achille Mbembe has done a lot of work critiquing this kind of essentialism, this identity essentialism that you find in various kind of African traditions of resistance in the 20th century. And he's an excellent critic of that. He has been accused of, and I quote, caricaturing legitimate African concerns as nativism. And then you've got, just to give one more, you've got Jonathan Jansen, who's a major figure in higher education here in South Africa and quite a serious critic of decolonization discourse as well. He's been accused of a disturbing intellectual arrogance. So what you can see here is that Ndlovu-Gatsheni is helping himself to this idea that when I disagree with you, I don't need to engage with you. If I think that your ideas are endorsing Western values or endorsing modernity, which are not proper to your epistemology, then you are selling out your African values. You are seduced, enchanted, interpolated, incepted, kidnapped, or in some sense, you denied the agency to be able to say for yourself, actually, I think this is a pretty good idea, even though it comes from the West. That, I think, is one of the strongest critiques that I have of this whole emphasis on the ethnies, that it's licensed a kind of vigilance around identity, that it encourages a kind of system in which one can disagree with someone on the basis of what they look like or what culture they come from, and say those ideas are not proper to you. And in the old days, there was the language of the Uncle Tom or something like this. But now it's like you've got this ostensibly sophisticated, academically endorsed vocabulary with which to criticize your opponents and accuse them of selling out their African values or being hopelessly enchanted by the West.